Yeah, thank you for having me, Herman. Really appreciate it. My name is Pascal van Steen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Spike, a growth marketing agency. We help companies, especially B2B companies, find more leads and customers for their business through digital marketing. And next to that, we also focus on helping companies raise investments through crowdfunding campaigns. So we do full marketing services for crowdfunding campaigns. Next to that, I also have my own marketing community. Obviously, you help out with some of the editions as well, called Growth Hacker Talk. And we host these editions mostly in the Netherlands, but also host some international events where we invite experts to share the knowledge about any domain expertise that they have. And it's also a nice vehicle to get to know the community and bring people together. Though currently it's not the most best thing to execute upon with the coronavirus and all. I guess so. If you look at it from a consulting perspective and like the different business stages that you're in, initially, so I guess you can divide it up in like three stages. Initial stage, stage one would be building a product that people want. Stage two is marketing a product that people want, and stage three is scaling the business. And growth hacking for me is making your marketing processes more efficiently to have a sense of scalability and disciplinary collaboration within the growth focus of your company. In the initial phase of your business, if you're still when you're still figuring out whether you have product market fit or not, who is your ideal customer, what kind of value proposition resonates with them, that's the stage where you don't want to focus too much on the digital tools and making your processes as efficiently as possible, because you still want to figure out a lot of qualitative information that you want to get back from your customers. You want to make sure and validate that they actually value your product as being a must-have product. That's something you need to focus on then. And in that phase, Paul Graham from Y Combinator also says this: it's way more important to focus on the things that don't scale, because these things generate way more value further down the line than, for example, using the next Snapchat or advertising platform that allows you to reach as many people as possible. You first really need to understand who is your best customer, and that's what the first phase is about. However, when you get to the phase of marketing a product that people want, and you already have built and validated that people want your product, it's difficult to quantify, but there's a couple of things that you can look at. And I think the best metric to look at whether you have product market fit or not is retention. You should have a good retention, activation and retention rate. So people should engage with your product. Really depends on what kind of business you run. So there's not really a gold standard, but yeah. So it really depends on your business model. I would say having some kind of baseline retention rate of people that keep using your product is already good enough. If you look at the best apps in the App Store, the 90-day retention rate is, I think, sub 20%, even for the top rated apps. So you shouldn't be afraid that people drop off, because the most active users are usually a very small subset of the people that actually get acquired and sometimes even activated. Well, if I bring it back to growth hacking, I think that terminology is more susceptible for misconceptions, because people don't really there's no marketing in that definition. I think growth is a way better term to define the activities of working as a multidisciplinary entity to facilitate growth, or growth marketing, because you also want to distribute your product, and that's the biggest problem that most of the startups are running into. But growth hacking, though, when you do understand the term, you know where it comes from. But people that haven't heard of it think it's some kind of magic where these people can do anything with the snap of the fingers. They make sure that people get into your product and start using it, and that's definitely not the way it works. It's a rigid process of testing rigorously among the areas of data science, technology and developing, tools and automation, and behavioral psychology. And you need to be at least a little bit proficient in any of these areas to be able to facilitate growth. So depends on how you define new. I guess you could say it's an innovative way of executing on marketing. So growth hacking came from the opportunity of seeing what the possibilities were with using these new domains that are developing very rapidly among the entire job market in data science and developing front end and back end, artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, using all that and some other frameworks that are already used in, for example, development and design teams like Agile Scrum, running in sprints. Marketing didn't really used to do that. So in practice, you saw where design teams and development teams were already very attuned to each other. Marketing was mostly still an afterthought, and mostly, especially the bigger companies, utilize what's called a waterfall strategy, where they would free up enormous budgets and then just see what happens. And if you don't spend all your budget, then you get less budget for the next quarter. So you need to spend it, but it's highly inefficient to do it like that. So I think the most innovative thing is about growth hacking or growth marketing is that they looked at these other departments and how they were operating and finding a way that streamlines and synchronizes actually with these other departments for the marketing teams as well. And now you had a way better way or modus operandi to cooperate together and start experimenting with different perspectives as well. This also depends on how big your company is. If you work at a large corporate, you might have to start out with like a small subset of a team that focuses on growth. So try to pick one developer, one designer, one marketer, one data scientist, and see if you can run some experiments. Because a big important factor in working with large companies, and this is also from my experience working with larger clients, is you need to get buy-in from the C-level. They need to know what kind of ROI they can expect and why it's more efficient. And so you need to produce some results with experimentation to have them see the value of what you can do of running experiments in these sprints and influencing the KPIs that are important there. That being said, in a smaller environment, in a small startup team, it's easier to like walk over to another department. Usually your team consists of like probably sub 20 people. It's easier to instill this culture of experimentation because by definition you only have to influence like a smaller subset of people and also a smaller subset of decision makers. So what's important when you start out with experimenting is see whatever data you already have, see if you can figure out or design your ideal customer profile so that you know where in which channels can we find our ideal customers the best, and most of all, fundamentally, define what your North Star metric is. So what one number defined success for your company, so that, because that gives you clarity and focus to move further and have some focus for the experiments that you want to brainstorm. Yeah, definitely. So the North Star metric, usually, so if you're not a social media platform or a media company, then mostly your North Star metric is going to be revenue focused. And depending on your business model, it might be average revenue per user. It might be average revenue per booking. It might be average revenue per purchase, something like that. It's easy to steer on that. If you are building something that's dependent on a network effect and you can monetize it before you have a large number of users on your platform, you'll be looking at engagement metrics. So this might be daily active users or weekly active users or monthly active users. And I even heard from some startups where the natural user behavior was that they only used it like once or twice a year, but when they use it in those periods, they would use it very heavily. So that's something you need to figure out from your own data. What's activity mean for our user base? So I think it's difficult to define like any one specific good growth marketer. Depends on what your business needs, I guess. If you have like high value touch point or high volume touch points, and people are navigating and generating events on your website a lot, then it might be interesting for looking for a growth marketer that is more on the data side of things, so that he can measure what's going on your website. If you have a more sales-oriented organization, you might want to look more at a someone that's proficient at marketing automation, so he can automate parts of the pipeline that take up a lot of time, but the activities can be very manual and would be less valuable for the organization if you keep doing them manually. So the marketing automation becomes a bigger factor in what's important. So that really depends on the organization that you're working in. Um, yeah, there's a couple of frameworks for this. I think Grow Tribe has branded it in a nice way. They call it the growth process, which consists of 5 steps, I believe. Gather ideas is the first step. Rank these ideas to prioritize and decide what you want to focus on. Then outline experiments. So basically use a test card and outline your hypothesis to define what success would mean in this particular experiment. Then work, which basically means execute the experiment and make sure that you can generate the results. And then eventually study results. So you want to analyze the data that you generated, and you want to see if the data that you generated produce some conclusive results to define if you could call the experiment a success or a failure. And when it's been a success, obviously in the next sprint, you want to scale it up and see if you can produce the same results. And if that's the case, then you want to see if you can playbook it and make it into a process for so that other people in the team or new hires can also execute upon. Um, uh, and a lot of people don't really know what kind of channels are available. Yeah, to give you some ideas, you can use paid marketing channels like Facebook advertising or TikTok advertising or Snapchat or whatever. You have organic channels like content marketing. And then you also have viral channels. So maybe you can build in a referral program into your product because people are highly engaging and already inviting their friends. You can stimulate that and incentivize it maybe even so that people get a higher K factor. K factor is basically the virality factor. If you want to get some more inspiration, I can highly recommend the book Traction by Gabriel Weinberg. It's basically a scientific case study of all kinds of startups that use like 19 different traction channels, and they highlight every single traction channel and how a specific startup used it to find their first customers. I would, yeah, I think I wouldn't go about it that way. I would go about trying to do the non-scalable things, so that you have like a small base of very enthusiastic users or clients, and then interview them and try and figure out where they hang out online, and use that as a frame of reference to for your like first experiments to see if you can find these people in the online domain as well. Yeah, there is definitely a transition period from doing the things that don't scale and you're still building the product and pivoting. And at some point, you need to make a decision and start doubling down on something that works. That being said, it's difficult to quantify that. If you have like some form of organic acquisition that just keeps going and you have people that keep using your product, um, so retention is good enough, then try and start doubling down. So whatever channel you then have, just try and scale it up. It's better to have one channel that works than do have like experiments running in 10 channels and it doesn't work, or it doesn't it's not efficient or effective. So I think if you have a channel that works, try and double down on that one and maybe start experimenting with one channel on the side to see if you can get some traction going.